Hi everyone. I want to talk briefly today about the concept of being a seeker and what that means for me and how that's been making me think recently about the way that I imbibe material surrounding my beliefs and my practice, and the kind of effect that that has on me and how it's necessary and why it's necessary and that kind of thing. So the concept of seekership has been floating around in New Age studies for a long time, well, relatively long time. It was developed by a guy called Colin Campbell back in 1972, and if you're interested in this, the article in question I believe was called the cultic milieu and secularization. So if you're interested in this, you might want to go and read that. And also my supervisor, Dr. Stephen Sutcliffe, he has written about this quite a lot as well. One of his earlier books on the New Age, I think it was called Children of the New Age, something like that, and I think it even has seekership in the title. He discusses it quite a lot in that, and he developed some further thoughts and some categories of seekership and that kind of thing. So it's kind of been floating around in the area of New Age studies. Before I go any further, just a little caveat. I feel like we still talk about New Age studies to a large extent in religious studies, and it's one of those terms, the New Age is one of those terms that gets used in academia, and it also gets used by kind of muggles, it gets used by regular people on the street to describe a lot of the things that we in the spiritual, kind of alternative spiritual community do. But it's not a term that we identify with anymore, and it's one of those terms that, like, by the time that people started using it, academically and, you know, other people in general in society, by the time it started getting used in that way, people weren't using that label for themselves really at all anymore. So it's kind of one of those things that, like, there's a lot of stuff going on in New Age studies that really applies to a lot of various beliefs and practices that the people themselves would not remotely consider New Age, and New Age has this kind of weird, slightly negative connotation of, you know, things that are New Agey. It's kind of almost a negative thing. So I'll just say that briefly. It's just one of those kind of catch-all terms that gets thrown around a lot to kind of cover the alternative spiritual community. So yeah, I think despite the fact that pretty much none of us consider ourselves to be New Age or within a sphere of the New Age, hardly any of us anyway use that label. And in fact, I feel like those of us who do, like, I'm thinking of New Age hipster, she uses it in a very tongue-in-cheek kind of way. It's like New Age and hipster are both labels that get thrown on, kind of put on people by outsiders rather than the insiders. They're not labels that are used by the insiders themselves. But yeah, despite that, a lot of the stuff that goes on in New Age studies is really relevant and really interesting for those of us in the kind of wider alternative spiritual community. And I think when I first started reading about this stuff, it was quite uncomfortable. Like, it was very uncomfortable to be reading about yourself. And because a lot of this stuff is very sociological, it's very social science based, and a lot of it was very sociological, the stuff that I was reading, using a lot of social theory to kind of pick apart all the little details of what people believe and what they say they're doing and how they interact with one another socially and all of that. It was a little bit uncomfortable. And definitely all that stuff around seekership, and it's all caught up in things about authority and our idea of having self-authority, and that our seekership is driven purely by ourselves. All of that, you know, is really picked apart by that, academia. It kind of felt strange for large swathes of what I do to be described by this kind of neat little category or little box. It was a very uncomfortable feeling for me. But I think I'm coming back around to a stage of feeling more like that they're interesting and useful concepts to use to highlight certain aspects of my practice and my beliefs. But yeah, I was just thinking about that again recently, just in light of having, you know, had a step back from that, and it just got me thinking about our tendencies in this community to read a lot, and, you know, how people have said in passing that pagans, you know, Christians are the people of the book and pagans are the people of the library. And I think, especially considering this tendency towards seekership, it's very true. It's very true that we tend to keep looking for more and more information, more and more techniques and perspectives and angles, and you know, we very seldom kind of drop anchor on a particular way of practice or a particular idea and kind of throw all of our eggs into that basket. There's always this sense that there will always be more wisdom out there to be gleaned. And this is not to say that that doesn't ever happen in other traditions, and I think sometimes that we can be a bit too dismissive of other religions in thinking that they do just drop anchor, that all of those people do just drop anchor in one place, for example with the Bible, and that they don't look past that, beyond that, or think more deeply using other materials about their spirituality, about their experiences of God or divinity or whatever. I think that's definitely not true, but there is a stronger tendency, I think, across the board in our community of everybody having this sense that they're searching for something. And I think I originally kind of saw this as being a negative thing for two reasons. Firstly, that it was caught up in this idea of self-authority and this kind of rejection of the idea that we operate under the authority of certain powers and certain social structures, and that we're not influenced by anything in particular, that, you know, we are our own authorities and that we have our own personal power and that we can go out there and make our own decisions without being influenced by anything or anybody. And I think to a degree it's a bit naive to assume that that's what people think, because I don't really think, I think if you actually sit down and ask these people who are engaging in seekership, like, you know, is this what you believe about yourself? Do you think that you're working in a vacuum? I think that's absolutely not true. I think actually as a community we're very in tune with the idea that we are part of a web and a structure, and that definitely includes our relationship with nature, with the ecosystem, with the planet, etc. But it also includes our relationship with other people. I think we are actually quite aware of that. A lot of us tend to be quite politically aware as well, so we're definitely aware of certain power structures that we're operating under and our own privileges and all sorts of other social structures like that. So I think it's not fair to say that we're not aware of our social surroundings and the influences that we operate under. So yeah, I would kind of argue against that quite strongly, actually, and I think it's not necessarily a bad thing for us to at least attempt to step out of those influences as much as we can, and try to formulate something that feels more of our own thing, that sits better with us, with who we are as individuals, and it gives us this training, I think, in not just going along with the status quo. And I have definitely found that over time I have become a lot more politically engaged and have thought a lot more about my own political stances and just about societal structures and so on in general, because I am in that habit now of thinking about how the world works and seeking information and knowledge and seeking to understand things and seeking to always change and evolve my own perception of things. And I think that's really, really valuable. There's also this kind of question around seekership and whether it actually is kind of detrimental to the individual, I think. So I remember that Steve Sutcliffe, that he had a few categories of seekership. I don't remember what they all were, but one of them, I know that one of them was kind of the kind of seeker that does drop anchor, that they kind of go into this kind of new age milieu and they rummage around, they find something, they find a practice, they find a tradition, they find something, and they're happy with that and they stick with that and they continue to practice that and they don't look any further. So one good example I can think of, I guess, would be, and this just shows you how broad the umbrella really is, would be somebody who comes across yoga, and kind of, I know quite a lot of people who engage with yoga, not just as a physical exercise, but also as a spiritual kind of structure, and they don't necessarily go beyond that and look for other kinds of spiritual practices and so on to go alongside that. Like, that just becomes part of their lives. But then he also mentioned there was definitely one of the other three types of seekership was, I think it was the perpetual seeker was what he called it. And it was the kind of seeker who does just keep going, and there seems to never be any end in sight. And the question that was raised, I think, was something along the lines of, you know, is the quest the end in and of itself? And I kind of got this sense at the time, I think, now I could be wrong, it's been a while since I've read his work, that there was this question of whether this was indicating some level of dissatisfaction in the individual, in the seeker, that there was this kind of underlying unhappiness or dissatisfaction, and this was in fact a negative thing, that they were engaging with this idea that they had to be constantly seeking, and that this was kind of not allowing them to be satisfied with something that they found that worked for them. But I would say, I think maybe this can sometimes be the case, and this is why I made a video recently. I can't remember which one it was, but I will endeavour to link it somewhere for you. I made a video where I did talk about the problem that we have when we feel like we need to constantly be improving. I think it might have had improvement in the title, and that sometimes we need to accept that the things that we've already been working with, things we've already been doing, are often good enough, and sticking with them, working with them, can be a positive thing, and accepting where we're at this moment in time and what it is that we feel like doing, rather than feeling like we need to constantly be kind of upping the ante. So there is that, but at the same time I think that the concept of perpetual seekership is a good thing. And for me it means that when I realise that I haven't been seeking in a while, that I've become, it does tend to link to stagnation for me. And I think it's because I've never landed into a wholesale tradition and complex structure of beliefs and practices that I can keep kind of digging into every time I feel like my practice is getting a bit stale. You know, it's very much a self-made practice, and for a lot of us that is the case. So we don't necessarily have a whole wealth of practices and traditions to go digging into when we feel like we have the time or the inclination to do so. We have to keep looking kind of outside of what it is that we're currently doing if we want to expand our horizons, I suppose. And I definitely see this as a positive thing, because it means that there's just an infinite potential for growth and development and expansion and change in our practices. And I've just really come to see this as such a positive thing. And I think I always have, but I think even more so in the last couple of years, because as I said earlier, I have definitely found that kind of having that perception on life has really helped me to become a much more agile thinker, I think, and to really not be afraid of changing and developing, like I said, my political views and just so many different ways of thinking about the world. And there's always that kind of fluidity and movement. And it's really helped me move from somebody who let myself be quite apathetic about a lot of issues that are actually really important to me, and back into a state where I am actively engaging with ideas and trying to figure out ways that I can help and ways that I can take action and ways that I can be accountable and things like that. And yeah, just to finish this video up, and this is kind of the main point that I really wanted to make when I turned on the video camera, and I finally got there, it was just, for me, seekership is all about always expanding my horizons with more reading and with engaging with the ideas of other people, and never being shy of looking down new avenues of material and ways that I can bring that freshness into my beliefs and into my practices. And you know, a lot of the time it can be about going back to old favourites, and one of the best ways for me to reinvigorate my spirituality, my practice, my faith, can be to go back to pantheistic texts that I've loved, animistic texts that I've loved, go back to old forums that really inspired me when I first read them, like it's the pantheism subforum at Mystic Wix. If it's still up, the site was up a while back, maybe a year ago or 6 months ago. It kind of comes and goes because it's not really active anymore, but that was a wonderful, wonderful forum, and it really inspired a lot of my practice, a lot of my perspectives. So going back to those old favourites and finding new gems as well, going back to old bloggers that I have really enjoyed reading. A really good example is John Halstead at The Allergic Pagan. He can be a little bit incendiary at times, but when he's writing about his animism and his archetypal paganism and stuff, like, he comes out with some great gems, and he's really put me onto a lot of great reading and stuff like that. So yeah, sometimes it's coming back to old favourites and seeing what they're up to now. And then sometimes it's just about challenging yourself to read something that's new or different, or even just challenging yourself to see the fiction that you're reading right now, or the other kind of non-fiction that you're reading right now, as part of that spiritual exploration, and thinking, how can I read this as a sacred text? What can this mean for me as a spiritual person? What can this mean for my understanding of divinity? So yeah, I think I'm going to leave that there for now, but this is a topic I might come back to at some point. I hope it was useful, I hope it was interesting, I hope you're all doing really well, and as always, I will talk to you again soon.